All right, so we're ready to get the corresponding decal on there. We have the diagram over here. I already looked it up. It's number 8. Always cut carefully. Try and cut close to the film if you can, but these are pretty high quality decals, so that's really not as much of a concern. If I was using kind of out of the box decals or decals that simply weren't as good, I would probably cut it a little closer to the film, but the film here is already pretty well trimmed. And with a little bit of solvent, it'll dissolve. Not a big deal. And we're going to be using the solvent anyway, so it's kind of this is not a very good cut job. It's a dull blade. Don't do that. Get a nice new blade. Nothing really bad happens if you do it like that, but it's just easier to cut, and it'll reduce the amount of mistakes. Kind of like cooking. A sharp blade is always better for cutting your veggies or your meat or whatever. Same deal with decals. All right. This is just my method here. I just have the tweezers, and I have my trusty UGA grad student cup. So thousands in tuition gets you. All right. And we're just submerging. Try and lift it up here. You don't have to set it in there for very long, maybe a minute or two. While that's happening, I should really make a little rig where I can kind of hang it on the cup, but while that's happening, we're going to kind of outline what exactly we're going to do. So you can kind of see here, this, with the original decal we got on, the one that's in the water right now, is just going to go onto this part. And then it'll form one contiguous pinstriping along either side. Beautiful car from 1982, one of the ground effects cars, piloted by René Arnoux and a young Alain Prost. Tamiya did a run of several of these cars from that season. I believe they also did Lotus cars. No, maybe not Lotus, but they did do the McLaren MP42 from that year. And, I think there was another one that they did as well. But nonetheless, it's a popular year, popular era. This is a pretty decent kit. It's held up well. It's an original kit from 82. I do have the Studio 27 photo etch on there, which is very, very nice. Good quality kit. And of course, these Shunko details go on nicely as well. I added some wiring. I'll show you guys here in a little bit. But altogether, it went together pretty well. Tamiya kits have aged extraordinarily well. I shudder to think about putting together a Rebel or an AMT from 1982. But with Tamiya, you can do so with confidence. Okay. And we're going to let this sit for a little bit. If you try and do it immediately after pulling it out, you're going to have a bit of a hard time. It's going to stay to the backing paper quite well. And you're just going to struggle needlessly. You can just wait another minute or two and it'll come off very, very easily. But again, just going to line it up pretty well. We're lucky here that these decals, or this particular decal, we can pick it up here and just very carefully handle it. You can kind of see it contours well with the shape of the body, and that's really, really helpful because that just simply provides a template that you can go on when mounting. Some decals aren't like that, and you have to sort of use spatial reasoning, your knowledge of the subject, to properly align a decal, and that's not necessarily bad, but it's not as easy. And if it's a complex decal, luckily none of these really are in this kit, it just increases your chances of making a mistake. So we'll wiggle it around and test. Some people don't like handling decals with their bare hands, or they advise against it. I personally have never had any ill effects. I've made probably, 25 or so models, so. I don't know if this shows up on the camera, but I opted to brush paint the black underneath the cowl here in the bodywork. I regret that. I will just airbrush it next time. I didn't feel like masking all of it. It is a bit of a difficult masking job. You can kind of see what you'd have to do to make that work. It's not a huge deal, but it just simply isn't as good. And, when you spend all this money and all this time, I've been doing this for about 20 years, you shouldn't half-ass things. You should do them right. All right. it's okay. The body is going to remain off of the chassis. It's going to be displayed that way. So it actually can't really sit on the chassis that well because of the wiring I did. So, all right. So when you can kind of see here the decal's starting to move on the backing paper here. So that's good. I like to put a little bit of water underneath where I'm going to apply the decal. And that's going to give it just some kind of, I don't know, lubrication, I guess. So you can freely position the decal and get it exactly where you want it to be. And that's going to be really important for this type of decal because, again, you're going to have to overlay it on top of another one. So it's really crucial that it fits in just the right position. And to that end, I'll say, you know, you can repair a torn decal or something like that fairly easily and make it align perfectly. In fact, this decal on this side actually broke into two pieces. But you can't notice because once you line it up and hit it with some solvent and maybe some heat, you know, it just kind of fades out. I'll try and, the lighting's going to be a little weird. But you can kind of see here again, we do have that contour of the body that lines it up well. And you just really move it into place. And again, I've found that my finger works perfectly fine. Now you can see here, this is going to be a little tricky on the back. It does kind of curve upwards and it does create kind of a weird look. We're going to try and minimize that as best we can. It's not perfect, but again, we hit it with some solvent and some heat. And, you know, it'll look just fine. And you can kind of see here, it's not sitting super well. We wouldn't want that black border to be pretty flush with the edge of the cowl. So, now sometimes you might come into situations where, you know, it's not going to be perfectly symmetrical on the other side. Or, you know, if you want to make it symmetrical, you're going to have to sacrifice something over here, like something's going to look a little off. Consistency is probably the most important facet, of making a really good scale model. Something that looks good. And I would advise that always choose the option that's the most consistent, which really means, you know, symmetry is more important. You see here, I'm just using some cotton buds, nothing crazy, regular old cotton buds, ear Q-tips or whatever. You don't need really like tools to do this that much. It's just not, mostly patience. Setting solution, of course, I'm using Microsol, which is kind of the industry standard. And notice again, I'm just using my hands for the most part. And that works. Again, it's a matter of personal preference. The hands do get riskier when you put the solvent on. The solvent will make the decals very, very malleable and conforming, but fragile. And if you're not careful, you could break them. All right. So the back doesn't look great. Yeah, it's not stellar. It's getting a little brittle back there too. You kind of see they're starting to crinkle up a little bit again. I think we are at that point where we got to put some solvent on there. So this is Microsol. I've had this bottle for probably a couple years now. One bottle is kind of a lifetime supply. Regular old brush here. And again, when I say consistency, we want to make those stripes in the back line up fairly well with one another. By that I mean this one and this one. That's going to be kind of the more important thing than, you know, really anything else. Yeah, it's a little rough looking back there, I'm not going to lie. That's okay. It's not a huge deal. And you can kind of see you got some room to kind of collapse it a bit. All right. And you can see we're fairly even on each side. Maybe you can't see that. Try it this way. Not 100%, it never is. But it's 100% enough, if that makes any sense. It doesn't. But I think you probably know what I mean. So the decal is starting to come apart a little bit back there. We can fix that once we get the hairdryer on it. It's not looking too terrible. And we can see, of course, it's fairly symmetrical on both ends. It's centered somewhat well. Not great. You can kind of see it's a little cockeyed, but not too much. And all the lines are lined up. Remember, this decal is going over top of this one over here. So these lines, these pinstripes, smaller pinstripes, have to line up. And that's the most important part. You have to kind of decide what's going to stand out the most if you have to accept a mistake. In my mind, the thing that's going to stand out the most is those lines being out of order. You're going to notice that immediately. You're probably not going to notice too much that it looks just a little tiny bit shitty back there. Or you're not going to notice it as much. Okay. All right, we'll hit it with the hairdryer.